have the privilege of welcoming our speaker, Mr. Mark Mix. Mr. Mark Mix is a native of Alfred, New York. He graduated from James Madison University in Harrisburg, Virginia, where he majored in finance. He is the president of the National Right to Work Committee, a 2.6 million member public policy organization, and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, which litigates on behalf of employees whose rights have been violated by compulsory unionism. The foundation is currently representing over 200,000 workers in 200 cases across the country. The committee and foundation are based in Springfield, Virginia. Mr. Mix and his wife, Diana, reside in Fairfax, Virginia, with their 6 children. Now I welcome Mr. Mark Mix.
Well, thank you. It is a privilege to be here. You can understand why I don't get behind podiums. Yeah. That's a problem. There were 3 things in college. I had a couple of really good friends in college that still are my friends, ironically, after all these years. And one of them was Rob Testweed. Rob Testweed is now a financial advisor with Merrill Lynch. I'm supposed to ring a bell for a plug there for Rob. If you're watching out there on the internet, I just gave you a plug. But Rob said, you know, you can talk about Mark, and he's pretty easygoing, and you can insult him, and you can intimidate him, and you can coerce him, and you can do all those fun things. But there are 3 things you can't talk about. And that would be his height, his hair, and his car. So today, let's set the ground rules that you can ask me any question you want about politics, policy, anything else, but you can't ask about my height, my hair, or my car, okay? All right, now that we got the ground rules set, let's talk about a policy issue that is growing in importance across the country. It was just, I think, last week, I always do, read Wes Pruden in the Washington Times. Who likes to read Wesley Pruden in the Washington Times? I'll tell you what, that guy has got great wisdom. And I was encouraged even more by Wes Pruden and all the things that he writes, because he, in his January 27th edition of Wes Pruden, I think he's in the paper a couple times, he was talking about free speech. And in that particular column, he wrote, and I think it was maybe the 4th or 5th graph down, he said, if persuasion won't work, compulsion will. And while Wes Pruden didn't know it, and he made a great point about free speech, what Wes Pruden has done is laid out the premise statement of labor policy in the United States of America. And since 1935 in this country, it has been the policy of the federal government, and as Wes Pruden correctly describes, saying that persuasion won't work, and so we'll trust in compulsion. Since 1935, workers in America have been forced and compelled to associate with an organization they never asked for, never wanted, and probably never voted for. But yet the federal government, in its infinite wisdom, said that these workers could be corralled into collectives, into monopoly arrangements, have someone else speak for them without their consent, and make this all legitimate under federal law. In a country founded on individual freedom, a grand experiment in individual rights of self-government, it's amazing that we even have to debate the notion of whether or not someone should be forced into a private organization for the privilege of working. The rights of a man's labor are really germinated and fertilized in the American soil. The right to control one's property is fertilized in America's soil. It is that individual freedom that we trust in, that we fight for, and that this country was founded on. And yet now, as Morton would say at the beginning of his speech, we live in interesting times because under federal law, workers can be forced to pay union dues or fees to an organization to get or keep a job. That's an injustice. Since 1955, the National Right to Work Committee has been laboring against this injustice. That sounds like a long time, and it is a long time. Unfortunately, we've had to continue to fight and to work hard to expand and to protect individual worker freedom across the country. But progress is being made, and it's an exciting time. I hope that before the final light on my life goes out, that the policy of American labor policy will be one of freedom and voluntarism. And you know, that's not a foreign argument in this debate. Voluntarism is the fundamental piece of advice that Samuel Gompers gave his trade unionists back in the 1920s and the 1910s. He said the workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions. Anything else is a menace to their rights. Here's the father of America's trade union movement urging his cohorts and his colleagues not to embrace compulsion, to understand that voluntarism, a group that is brought together by voluntary means, is inherently stronger than one that's forced together through compulsion. Labor unions in America are missing the point, and it's finally catching up with them. You know, today in America, about 11.1% of all the workers, both public and private, are now union members or members of a union or in a union, sometimes not by choice. That's down from about 36% in the 1950s. And I would suggest to you that the reason for that reduction in the union percentage is, first of all, because we've grown jobs, but secondly, because they've relied on compulsion as their primary mechanism for recruiting members. You know, the idea of getting a group together, of joining a group, of supporting a group financially or through your actions is something that comes naturally if you support what that group does. The idea of being involved and supporting it is really foreign to someone who doesn't want to join, and we don't do that in this country, except in labor policy. It's a unique particular instance. And unfortunately, for those workers that are forced into those collectives, there's very little relief. The National Right to Work Committee, as I mentioned, since 1955 has been working to end compulsory unions in America. The National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation has been around since 1968. We do nothing but represent employees. We've made 17 trips to the United States Supreme Court. One case that I'll point out in just a minute is maybe you have heard of, maybe you didn't, but it's an important case, and it gives you a perspective of how forced unionism has metastasized from a federal policy in the 1930s to real-life implications for parents, for workers, and for just individuals that seek freedom in the United States of America. Let me tell you a story about a woman by the name of Pam Harris. Pam Harris lives in the suburbs of Chicago. She has a son by the name of Joshua who's 25 years old. And Joshua can't take care of himself. He is developmentally disabled to the point where he needs constant care. And that person that gives him care is, no surprise, his mother, Pam. And in the state of Illinois, they have what's called a home care program that allows individuals like Joshua to receive money through the Medicaid program to provide for his care. And in this case, Pam, his mother, is the one that provides for his care. So Joshua gets this stipend. It's a means-tested program. We can talk about that as that's another time for debate. But the idea that Joshua gets this money to help provide for his care allows the state of Illinois to dramatically reduce the cost of providing care to these people through institutions and other state-run programs. So in 2002, then Governor Rod Blagojevich, who is up for re-election, he's now in another type of free public housing. He talks with the leaders of the Service Employees International Union in Illinois, and they say, you know, Governor, it would be really kind of neat that if all the people that were in this home care program and are getting Medicaid stipends would send some of that money to us so we could speak for them in Springfield, Illinois, the state capital. And Governor Blagojevich, who I think had received something like $14 million from this particular union in his reelection fund, decided to sign a piece of paper. He had a pen, and I don't know if he had a cell phone, but he had a pen. And he signed a piece of paper that allowed the Service Employees International Union to extract basically about about $800 a year from personal care providers like Pam Harris, who were taking care of their own children in their own home. We filed a lawsuit on behalf of 8 mothers, Pam being one, Susie Watts being another, 3 of whom were compelled to pay this fee in order to take care of their own children in their own home. People hear that and they shake their head and say, how can that be? How can a mom be forced to pay a private organization to speak for her in a state capital to take care of her own child in her own home? Interesting question. Well, the federal courts didn't think that our case was that good because we lost. And we went to the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of these 8 mothers, these 8 home health care providers. And the Supreme Court looked at this case, and, you know, for those of you who follow the court, it's kind of mysterious. We get to see them sometimes when they're in the court and they're discussing cases, but how these cases get to them is kind of a unique process. The way we understand it is that on Fridays, while they're in session, the 9 justices and no one else, no clerks, no staff, no one else, goes into this room, And they have this stack of cases, and the Chief Justice looks at them and says, okay, who wants to hear this case? And if the Chief Justice sees that 4 hands go up in those chambers, that case gets considered as to be debated and to have oral arguments in the court. Is that me? Oh, okay. Thanks, Howie. It was kind of scary. I thought it was my stomach. Okay, all right. Yeah.
They are renovating the old defense intelligence agency building across the street. A month or so ago, a huge 4x8 piece of plywood blew off the top, came over here, and crashed into one of our windows in our building. So.
Okay. Anyway, as I was saying, the justices get in this room and they raise their hands, and if you get 4 hands, it's likely you'll get an oral argument in a case, or you get some kind of action at the Supreme Court. Most cases, I think about 8,000 cases, or petitions for certiorari, as they say. That's a Latin term that I don't pronounce very well. Anyone else can help me with that, I'd appreciate it. But anyway, that's the notion of you'd like the court to hear this case. About 8,000 are petitioned each year, and I think they argued 88 or 90 cases the last term in the 2014 term. So it's kind of a low probability that you're going to get a chance to have a case heard like this. Well, we took the Harris case, filed a petition for cert to have them hear the injustice of this case, and this case, as we understand it, was conferenced 7 times by the Justices of the Supreme Court. We think that's a record. And basically what that means is 7 times that case went into that room on a Friday, and hands got raised, and things happened, and questions were asked, and 7 times the court decided that maybe we shouldn't take this, let's get some more information. They asked the federal government to brief the case. They asked the state of Illinois to brief the case. They asked for answers to those briefs of those particular parties. And sure enough, at some point, finally, we got the 4 votes we needed, and they agreed to hear the case of Pam Harris and 7 other home health care providers in Illinois. And on January 20th, I think, of 2014, we had oral arguments. An attorney from the National Right to Work Foundation argued the case. Pam wasn't able to come because her son Josh was at home, couldn't travel well, and she stayed to take care of her son. But Susie Watts, another mother who takes care of her child, did come, and she was there. And what a glorious day that was, to think of 8 women with really no financial capacity to litigate a case like this all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, with no capacity to run this case through the federal court system. But that day, that January day, here was Susie Watts standing on the steps of the highest court in the land to have her case redressed. If you ever think there's no hope in America, give that up. There is hope. There's opportunity. I mean, sometimes things don't go our way and we get disappointed and we get discouraged. But that day, a day like that, when you watch someone who has principle and courage to stand up and has the help of an organization like the National Right to Work Foundation, get her day in court, and to get her case heard by the highest court in the land is really something that should encourage all of us. Well, the case was heard, arguments were given, and it was a wonderful day, and the next case was gavelled in, and on they went. And of course, the court ends their term on June 30th of each year, and as you get closer to that June 30th deadline, cases start to pop up that are of more importance, and generally the court holds their most important cases toward the end to release their decisions. And as we began to watch, anyone who's a fan of the SCOTUS blog, a Supreme Court of the United States blog, does a really good job of reporting what the court's up to and speculating and reading the tea leaves, although that's pretty hard to do. They mentioned the Harris v. Quinn case, Quinn being the governor of Illinois, who that we were suing at the time after Blagojevich left and went someplace else. Quinn became the governor, and so we were suing him. Harris v. Quinn kept moving later and later into the term, and the decision didn't come, and the decision didn't come. And finally, on June 30th that year, there were only 2 cases left. And the first case was Harris v. Quinn, and the second case was Hobby Lobby. You've all heard of the Hobby Lobby case, right? Those were important cases, right? Hobby Lobby was a critical case as adjudicating Obamacare and how it would impact religious organizations, specifically the company Hobby Lobby, whose leadership is just wonderful Christian people and do a great job. But it came down to 2 cases left in the whole term, and Harris v. Quinn and Hobby Lobby were the 2 cases. And Fox News, we had a truck out in Pam Harris's driveway out in Chicago, and media was ready. We were all ready. And they released the Harris v. Quinn case at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was a great victory. We won overwhelmingly 5-4 decision. It was a fascinating decision. Yeah. Yeah, overwhelmingly. Yeah. In this case, that's a unanimous win in this case. And at exactly 10/12, they released the Hobby Lobby case. So you probably didn't hear about Harris v. Quinn because Hobby Lobby sucked all the oxygen out of the room. And that's okay. We still won the case. Today, over 2 million home health care providers across the country have been freed from the compulsion of paying a fee for the privilege of taking care of people. Schemes in 18 states have been struck down that had this similar type of provision that allowed these union bosses to collect these fees from these people for doing nothing other than speaking for these individuals. Now that sounds like a great win, but let me tell you about the extension of that win and how it's going to impact compulsory unionism for sure in the public sector, in the government sector, and possibly even in the private sector when we get to the finish line with this particular line of reasoning. One of the interesting developments in our country has been, we've recognized this private sector unionization model of confrontation, labor versus management, this intimidation that goes on, and somehow this notion that if labor wins, management loses, if management wins, labor loses. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, the bottom line is, if you're working for someone, if you're employing people, you ought to take care of them. If you're working for someone, you ought to work hard for them. It was Samuel Gompers who said, the best friend that the working man has is an employer who makes a profit. That's pretty simple. That's pretty common sense. But today in labor policy, we operate under this notion that it has to be this confrontation, this zero-sum game. Well, unfortunately, that theory has expanded and jumped and made that synaptic jump into the government sector. And when you think about that, you wonder, how can that be? How can we take this zero-sum confrontational model of the private sector labor policy and apply it to government? Well, I'll tell you, it was hard, and it takes a real stretch. In fact, Franklin Roosevelt was against it. In fact, George Meany of the AFL-CIO was against it. The Executive Council of the AFL-CIO was against it. The notion that you would unionize government employees was something that was an anathema to them. How can you do this? We have no more rights to redress government than ordinary citizens have. That was their position. But today, the final frontier for organized labor is government. I think something like 37% of all government employees in America are unionized or under monopoly bargaining contracts that throw them into these collectives. The Harris case is very interesting because, you always want to, you get encouraged by the reaction of your opponents when things like the Harris case come up. And if you're watching the opponents in our particular area of public policy, you read In These Times, you read Mother Jones, you read The Nation magazine, and you may launch out into Jacobin or whatever these obscure media outlets are. And they were so scared of the Harris case, they called it the end of unionism. They said this was the end of unionism if the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Pam Harris and the other plaintiffs in this case. And why did they say that? Because the idea behind the Harris-Quinn case, and there's another case coming right down the pike that will hopefully finish this job, was that in government, how is it that a private organization can take money from Scott and give it to me, allow me to speak for Scott without Scott's permission? We have this notion that political speech is protected by the First Amendment. That if you're speaking politically, you have First Amendment protections under the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights. What we alleged in the Harris case, we didn't allege it, we stated it in the Harris case. We have to be careful with our words here. The other side alleges and claims, we state. Remember that? Yeah. Got it? That's Leadership Institute training coming through right there. I've been to all these schools, by the way. Yeah. So we stated that this speech was political speech because everything that a government union does is political by nature. They're trying to influence the policy of government. So if we could get some traction on the notion that everything a government union does is political speech, and then extend that it should be protected by the First Amendment, then union officials would be able to extract absolutely zero from any government worker as a condition of employment. Well, this idea got so hot on the presses and the typesetters of these magazines that I just mentioned that they said this is the end of unionism if they win the Harris case. And they said they relied on, get this, they relied on Justice Scalia to defend their compulsion in the public sector. And that they probably could make a pretty good case for that, because Justice Scalia is kind of one of these guys say, hey, go sort this out someplace else, it doesn't belong here. But in this case, because we made the First Amendment speech case, we thought we had a chance of getting Justice Scalia agreeing with us on the case. And so in these times, The Nation, all these other periodicals and magazines said, if the Right to Work Foundation wins this case, it's the end. They've finally gotten to the end of forced unionism in government. Well, we were kind of encouraged by that. We thought, hey, that'd be a good idea. Actually, we were thinking about it the whole time. Secret, don't tell anyone out there. But the idea is that this compulsion can be struck down because of these speech rights. And the unions, while grabbing all this power in the government sector, had a vulnerability. And we were able to capitalize on it. Unfortunately for us, the 5-4 decision that we won on behalf of Pam Harris basically allowed the Supreme Court to say, you know, these home health care providers are different types of employees, and therefore we don't have to go that far. And we believe probably maybe Justice Roberts settled down Justice Alito, who was fire and brimstone on this, who were really excited about it. He actually laid what I would say the roadmap of these types of cases, talking about the peculiar nature of labor's privileges in America, to force someone to pay them for the privilege of working or speaking. So anyway, the Supreme Court says, well, we'll go this far. We'll take all these people in this specific scenario, and we'll outlaw that, and we'll say that can't stand anymore. Well, that's okay. That was a nice victory, and I forget what the law of public policy from Morton is about incremental gains. Increments are important. Some increments aren't gains. This was actually an incremental gain that was important, because the next case that's coming, and it's already been petitioned to the Supreme Court, is a case called Friedrich out of California, brought by the Center for Individual Rights. I think another alumnus from the Leadership Institute is working for that organization. But they brought a case based on the Harris case, based on the Knox case that we won at the Supreme Court 3 years ago now. Another case we won on behalf of California workers. And they're bringing state employees to the court saying, okay, you said that this was an anomaly, this was wrong, and you were able to cordon off these specific types of employees in the Illinois case. Now we bring state employees to you. What are you going to do now? And the case is already at the U.S. Supreme Court. So we think maybe if they'll take that case this year, it won't be argued by the foundation. We have briefed the case with them, helped them write their briefs. They've done a great job litigating the case, this group. But we now have a case squarely in front of the court that takes away this notion of employees that are specific to a particular field or specific in a particular way, and saying, let's apply this to all government workers. So keep an eye on a case called Friedrich. It is a big case out of California. If we win that, hopefully we'll have a national right to work law for all government employees in America. Who'd have thunk it? Who'd have thunk it? Yeah. In the private sector, let's talk about what's happening across the country. And I know I have to think about my time here. I've got this really sophisticated watch. I usually wear this on my wrist, but I'm running out of time. In the private sector, it's an exciting time as well. 2 new right-to-work states, I think I've already talked to you about those. Indiana and Michigan, of all places, have passed right-to-work laws. We now have 24 states who protect a worker's right to join a union, who will defend a worker's right to join a union voluntarily. But no worker in the state of Michigan or Indiana now can be forced to pay dues or fees just to get or keep a job. That's exciting. If we can do it in Michigan, we can do it anywhere. That's a Frank Sinatra song, isn't it? We can do it here, we can do it anywhere. And that's right, that's true. And so what we're seeing, while we may be disappointed about other policy issues in the country, what we're seeing in the labor policy sector is incredible progress. Today, we're debating right-to-work laws in Kentucky, in Montana, in Colorado, in New Mexico, in Missouri. And the debate over right to work is increasing, I'd like to say exponentially, but I'm not really a math major, so I really can't defend that. Squared, I can defend that. Yeah, squared, I can defend that. But the debate over freedom in America's workplace is growing, and the enthusiasm and the interest and the activism around against compulsory unionism is growing. It's such an exciting thing to see. For those of us who've labored in these fields, and I'm now 29 years in the business, which is a long time. I know I don't look that old. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's good. But it has been exciting to see. You know, I think of the story in the Bible of Joseph. You know, Joseph understood that there would be lean years and fat years. And I got to tell you, in my career at Right to Work, there have been lots of lean years, those 7 years where things are going to be bad, and if you haven't prepared, you're going to be in real trouble. But the preparation that you make in those 7 lean years allow you to participate in the opportunities of the 7 fat years. And at the National Right to Work Committee, while people yell and scream at us because we don't do everything they want us to do, and we're so single-minded that we can't get off the idea of one thing and one thing only. You know, it's kind of neat to run an organization that's binary. You know, we're either on or we're off. We don't have to make difficult decisions about other policy issues. You're either for forced unionism or you're not. You're either for freedom or you're for coercion. Pretty simple to sort it all out when it's binary like that, whether it's on or it's off. And that helps because the American public agrees with us. Nearly 80% of Americans know it's wrong to force workers to join or pay dues. But you know, the Sir Galahad theory, which is another one of Morton's policy principles, is that just being right is not enough. Just being right is not enough. If that's all it took, we would never have to fight over the idea that someone could be forced to pay dues or fees to get or keep a job. So what do we have to do? We have to learn, we have to train, we have to continue to work and work hard, and we have to do things right. We have to make fewer mistakes than the other side. Exactly the model of the Leadership Institute is they train literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of new operatives across the country, of which I am one. We go out across the country and we do these things. If we stay principled and we stay committed and we don't make more mistakes than the other side using neutral technology, we will win. And I come to you today with the optimism and the enthusiasm to tell you clearly here on this day, whatever day, what's today, February 3rd? Is that what it is already? February 4th. February 4th, 2015, that compulsory unionism days are numbered. Forced unionism days are numbered. And with growing interest of young people that we get to talk to and people that have been around for a long time and continue to put their shoulder behind this idea of freedom, we will win this battle, and it will make a difference not only in the lives of those workers who are now compelled, but in the lives of all of us as individual freedom helps create economic opportunity. It's a privilege to be part of that fight. It's a privilege to be able to have the support of literally hundreds of thousands of Americans who make the work possible. Some in this room have done that, and I thank you for that. And for those of you who will become elected officials, there's some of them back there, and you have 421 of them now, you're either for freedom or coercion. And I will hunt you down one way or the other. It's been a privilege to talk with you. I would love to take some questions, and we can enjoy that and expand on this quite a bit. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. Okay, that looks like a favorable question over there. I will take this question over here, and I'll come right back to you. It's Aloysius?
That's right.
Oh, Aloysius. Oh, my gosh, Aloysius is here. Here's another leader in the issue of compulsory unionism. Thanks for the work that you're doing.
But thank you. I had an organizational question. As a leader of two organizations, you've got your committee and your legal defense fund, and you've got a star in Bill Messenger.
Yeah.
Won the Supreme Court case.
Yeah.
And he spoke at the Heritage Foundation, another great organization, and basically had no problems in Kentucky with the concept of local right to work. And then I understand you have another great guy, Greg Murad, doing your government relations, and I understand he made comments against the local right to work concept in Kentucky. And they work, I guess, for the two different organizations, the Legal Defense Fund and the committee. And the local right to work initiative in Kentucky is, about freedom versus the coercion and compulsion. But how do you deal organizationally when there are two people who've come out basically for and against the local right-to-work efforts in Kentucky?
Your question? No. No, Aloysius, that's a great question. I was hopeful that and I'll do this in front of all the people here, there is no conflict in the position that the organizations have taken, either one. I mean, if you go back and look at what Bill Messenger said, he said, and let me just I got lectured for 15 minutes by Senator Rand Paul yesterday on this very issue, saying that we made so many people mad about our position. Let me explain the position to you right now, and we'll get this straightened out and settle it for once and for all, because there are so many implications of what's happening with that program. I mean, the idea that people are working to free workers from compulsory unionism is a great thing. We ought to do that any place, any time, any way we can. But we need to understand, as Morton Blackwell's Laws of Public Policy say, some gains are made by incrementals, some increments are not gains. And I want to use that in the context of talking about the local option right to work. Do you think this is a novel idea that's never been tried before, Aloysius? Do you know? It's been tried. It's been tried where? 1965, AFL-CIO versus Puckett. Supreme Court, the highest court then, it wasn't the Supreme Court, struck it down as being preempted, said it can't happen locally. It happened in Clovis, New Mexico, in a campaign that I was at. They tried to pass a right-to-work law in Clovis, struck down by the 10th Circuit Federal Court. It happened in Caruthersville, Missouri. Litigation filed against the city of Caruthersville. It was struck down. We were successful. The Right to Work Foundation helped litigate a case in the San Juan Pueblo, an Indian case, which subscribes to the notion under Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley Act, which says states and territories can outlaw the closed shop. Indian nations are sovereign nations. They are territories. Therefore, no problem. We defended it. They have a right to work law out there. Indian nations can have that. The local option right to work is an interesting concept, and the idea of freeing workers from forced unionism is something we support. However, in Kentucky, it is now being used as a reason not to vote on a state right to work law. And the idea of, first of all, we ought to free all workers from forced unionism. The fact that 5 counties, I think 4 counties have done it, 1 more county is going to have to do it. Hardin County, there is litigation filed by the Attorney General and the United Auto Workers. I don't know if they're going to enjoin the 4 counties that already have local right to work ordinances until litigation is completed. Excuse me for getting too technical about it, but I'm dealing with this right now. This is, and Aloysius knows that, and so we'll get this cleaned up and get it stopped up. One of the most important things that we can do in politics is we can get politicians to take a stand one way or another on an issue. The accountability of a recorded vote is critical for we the people to understand where our politicians stand. In Kentucky, we're very close to passing a right to work law. In fact, the state Senate passed a right to work law by a 2-to-1 vote, sending it over to the House saying Kentucky ought to be a state right to work law. Have a state right to work law. Unfortunately, we have these counties that are operating, and they're doing it. They're appropriate. I don't argue with their methods, their objectives. Well, let's say I don't argue with their commitment to right to work. It's an important commitment. But let's expand this theory out and talk about how this goes. So you're a company looking to locate a business, and you think Warren County, where Bowling Green, Kentucky, is a place where you want to do business, and you want to invest $100 million in a plant because they now have a right to work law at the county. Well, I will tell you this. If I'm a union official and I recognize the impact that I can have with $50,000 in 3 city council races or county commission races, and I can repeal the right to work law zip-thud on a county-by-county basis, I'm concerned. I don't think it's going to have the economic impact that they think it's going to have. I don't think companies are going to locate there in a county right to work, because the 24 states that have right to work, not one of them that's been active, that's actually been working, has ever been repealed. It's a hard thing to do. You've got to get the state house, the state senate, you've got to get a governor to try to repeal a right to work law. In this case, we're going to reduce it down to the county level. Now, what's happened, and the sponsor of the right to work bill down there, I won't mention any of his name, but you can look it up, he is now saying that we will not have a vote in the Kentucky House on right to work because the local option is the way to go. And now that's spreading to Wisconsin, where, believe it or not, we may have the 25th right to work law because the legislature there is going to do a private sector right to work law, but now the local option is creeping in, saying if we can't get it at the state level, we'll do the local option. I mean, the idea of passing the buck, and it's not passing the buck for the people that are doing it. They really are well-meaning. They're well-intentioned. But from a strategic standpoint, what do? We take the pressure off the state legislature to free all workers from compulsory unionism. We set up a right to work law that's easily attacked. Now we have to defend at the local level. And it's, if you look at the teachers union is a great example of how this works. They understand it very well. The way they control our government education system is by taking control of school boards. And they know at the very local level that no one else can really afford to play there. They've got the time, talent, and treasure to take this to the lowest level of our government system, i.e. the school board, control the school board, negotiate with their elected officials that they put there, and basically have their way with the government school system. This issue, and it's very difficult, I've been accusing Kentucky of not being for right to work. I'm against right to work. Well, Goodness gracious. If there's one thing I understand, one thing I know, and one thing I'm for, what do you think it is? Yeah, it's the right to work, free of forced unionism. This, what we believe will happen there, and I don't. Again, you've got me in a whole bunch of hot water, Aloysius, and that's okay, because you need to understand this as well. I mean, there are ways to do things, and there are ways. You know, it's funny because every time we win a case, like we won a case called the Beck decision in 1988. The Beck decision said that private sector workers could still be forced to pay fees, but they couldn't pay for politics. And the union had to prove that what they were charging these people as a condition of employment were going to be used for contract negotiating, grievance arbitration, and collective bargaining. Those three things. Everything else was off the table. They couldn't force anyone to pay it. And at that time, in the Beck decision, the unions could only prove that 19% of their revenue stream was being used for those three things. Everything else was outside of those three things, which are allegedly the core mission of organized labor. Well, what happened after that is all of a sudden everyone said, well, let's do this Beck thing. And everyone had a Beck program and a paycheck protection program. And it all kind of jumped up and jumped out. And paycheck protection was being used as a reason not to do right to work. We'll still force you to pay $50. You just want it to pay $75. That's not a victory for our side. And frankly, it kicks one of the stools. You know, I came from an old dairy farming community. My uncles were dairy farmers. Anyone, ever been on a dairy farm and see that little three-legged stool? It's about this tall. And you know a good dairy farmer because he's got calluses below his first knuckle. That's a good dairy farmer. You know that. When you shake his hand, he's got bumps right there because he grabs that stool, runs over to the next cow, sits down, and does the work. Forced unionism can be attacked, and we can take out the whole thing. But when you take out one of the legs of that stool, the stool can't stand. And the notion of taking out the political component but allowing the forced fees component, saying, yeah, you still got to pay something, that diminishes our ability to end forced unionism in totality. Not that we want to make it as bad as possible. That's not the rationale. But actually trying to make it less bad and understanding that when you make it less bad, you diminish the ability to get the full policy is something we need to be very careful about. If you come to a legislative project management school taught right here at the Leadership Institute, you will hear a lecture about a 6-step phase of getting people to do what you want. Step 1, I'll go through it very quickly, and I don't mean to monopolize this, but it's important. This should be teaching. We should walk away from here with more knowledge and be better, more effective activists. The first stage is that people will ignore you when you're trying to do something from a grassroots perspective. They don't ignore you because they don't know what you're doing. They ignore you because what you're doing is not having an impact on them. At this point, it hasn't risen to a level where it makes a difference. It's not going to affect my election. It's not going to hurt me. They're not doing anything that's going to hurt me, so I will ignore them. The moment that you cross the threshold of actually having an impact on them, when Scott finally says, hey, that Mark Mix guy is causing me trouble, I need to do something about it. What will Scott do? He'll pick up the phone and he'll call Mark Mix and say, Mark, why are you doing this to me? We're friends. You know me. You have my phone number. Just call me. I'd be glad to talk to you about anything, anytime, anywhere. Come on. We're buddies. We've been, hey, I saw you 3 years ago at the Leadership Institute Wake-Up Breakfast. We had a nice breakfast together. Just call me. I'm your friend. That's called complain. That's step 2. Step 3, hang on, let me give you the response to step 2, complain. Now you've got their attention, you've got to find a way to double the pressure now because they're moving along this continuum of doing what's right and doing what's principled and doing what you'd like them to do. If you continue doing what you're doing, you'll move to step 3, and that is they will call you and they will threaten you. And they'll say, Scott will call me and say, Mark, if you don't stop doing what you're doing, I will fill in the blank. Or I will if you don't, or I will if you will, or anyway, I don't want to get too confused about it. But they'll threaten. And then generally within 15 to 25 hours later, one of your board members, if you haven't picked your board members right, or one of your bill sponsors, or one of your best friends in politics will call you up and they will threaten you too. They will threaten you too. And they'll say, I can't believe Scott called me. What are you guys doing? You better back down. And if you've got 4 donors and this guy gives 25% of your budget, what are you going to do? If you've got 137,000 donors over the last 12 months that give you an average of $74, what are you going to do? You're going to politely say, I'm sorry, we're going to continue. So step 4 is other people threaten. And that other threatening is someone that's important to you. Step 5, once you get to that point, if you can increase the pressure again, is they will offer you something they know you want but you should never take. They will offer a compromise. I grew up near Corning, New York. Anyone know what Corning, New York is? Everyone ever heard of Steuben Glass? Technicolor, Steuben Crystal. You've heard of Steuben Crystal, right? Steuben Crystal, there's probably, most politicians in D.C., if you go into their legislative office, they will have a Steuben Crystal bauble. It will be beautiful. It'll be round. It'll have the United States seal inside. Building a ship inside of a bottle is one thing. Putting the United States flag inside of Steuben Crystal is another. I don't get it. We're not supposed to. But they will give you something that they know you want that will look really impressive, and then they want you to accept it, and then all the pressure that you've generated to get to the final stage, which is them to take action, step 6, to do what you want them to do, will be dissipated, and then you'll have to build all that pressure up again to get them to go all that farther. The local option right to work issue is one where, do we want to free all workers from forced unionism? Yes. Do we want to free one worker? Yes. Do we want to free 50 workers? Do we want to free the county? Yes. But ultimately, what does it do to our ability to pass a right to work law in Kentucky? And then, Aloysius, what happens if they get this and they're able to succeed under this so-called home rule designation that they have? What happens in Detroit, Michigan? What happens in Atlanta, Georgia? What happens in Charlotte, North Carolina? Or Raleigh, North Carolina? Where the liberal bastions, if you look at the electoral map, the blue spots in every state but California, New York, Washington, Oregon, every blue spot on the map is right around the state capital in those counties. What happens to right to work laws in those states? Now we have to defend them there. Bill Messenger said that we could probably defend a state passing a law that grants counties the right to outlaw forced unionism. That's what he said. What Greg Murad said was when it was passed at the county level without a state authorization, which the people in Kentucky think the home rule is enough authorization to do this, that the bottom-up right-to-work theory probably can't be defended legally based on the precedent, based on what we see as the preemption doctrine of the National Labor Relations Act. That's our position. It's not inconsistent. Bill said you could defend a state law that would say states could do this, specifically outlaw forced unionism, because the state has the ability to operate Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley Act. But the localities, if home rule is that broad sweeping, then by golly, we know what we've got to do. Everyone leave Washington. Because we can do anything we want. We can repeal Obamacare locally, county by county, right? Under this broad home rule doctrine. That's my thought on that. Strategically, the National Right to Work Committee is trying to pass a right to work law in Kentucky. We're hopeful that people in Kentucky will. We're in a lot of trouble down there. I got a call, like I said, from a well-recognized politician saying, people are so mad at you, set back the right to work cause for years. That's literally a quote. In Indiana, in 2011, when we were lobbying Mitch Daniels, who was against right to work, and Brian Bosma, who was the Speaker of the House, Republican, one of our best donors called up and said, I just had dinner with Brian Bosma, and I can tell you he is so mad at you, he can't even see straight. You have set the cause of right to work back for years. When we were having dinner, he got 10 phone calls on his cell phone while we were having dinner, urging him to pass right to work. You need to stop this right away. I hung up the phone and said, we got to double the pressure right away. And sure enough, on February 1st, almost 3 years ago, Governor Mitch Daniels, who heretofore, for 7 years, had indicated his opposition to right to work, signed America's 23rd right to work law. Okay. All right. We can continue that discussion. Yes, sir.
I'll keep it a little simpler. Scott Walker in Wisconsin a couple of years ago did a great job of castrating the unions there in terms of a bunch of stuff. But principally the ability for the unions to require the state to take money out of their paychecks, which makes it so much simpler as a checkoff system. I assume that if that information is correct, I assume that the unions are fighting this, and if they are, how successful have they been through the state or federal courts to say we can demand the state take out that $30 every 2 weeks?
Yeah, the litigation continues. Literally, after all these years, 2011 was when Act 10 passed. The question was about Scott Walker in Wisconsin. What did Scott Walker do? Scott Walker basically said that the state of Wisconsin is no longer going to collect the money for the union and forward that to them from state employees. It's called a dues checkoff. It's one of the two things that union officials demand in every contract. One, they want the ability to force every worker to pay a fee. And then secondly, and this is strikeable, this is a no compromise request, that the employer, in this case the state of Wisconsin, collect the money and forward it to the union. And why do they want to do that? Because if they have to go out every month and dun somebody for $35, the person says, what have you done for me this month? And they can argue about it. So it's much easier for the union to have the state collect the money or the locality collect the money and forward it to them. It's kind of a neat little system. Scott Walker did that. Litigation, obviously, all over the place. So far, every attack on Act 10 has been defended, and every attack has been upheld by the courts. Indiana and Michigan, same thing. There's litigation going on about both the right-to-work laws there. They've all been upheld. One of the things that we need to remember is Scott Walker did not repeal monopoly bargaining. He did not. They still bargain over wages there. And probably someday, by leaving that structure in place, it'll be expanded and they'll start bargaining over other things. But for now, it's been good. The one thing he did do was allow government employees in Wisconsin to choose whether or not they want to join or support a union. He gave them a right-to-work law in the public sector. There is a very active movement right now to finish, well, I won't say finish the job, but to expand those protections to the private sector. And there's been a bill introduced in the Wisconsin Senate, and there will be a bill, I think there's a bill already introduced in the Wisconsin House, to make Wisconsin the 25th right-to-work state when it comes to private sector workers. Looks like the votes are there in the House. Looks like you'll see the debate begin in about May, and it's going to be very close. It'll be within 1 or 2 votes in the Senate, and then it will be put on Scott Walker's desk, and we'll see what he does with that. To this point, Scott Walker has said that he did not want the bill on his desk, that it's be a distraction, and that he's not interested. In fact, he made a comment in December that was really just, I mean, he apparently didn't have the right people around him, or maybe he did, unfortunately. And he said, you know, I will oppose right to work. I don't want it on my desk, and I will do everything possible to keep it off my desk. I mean, that's a quote from him. Hopefully he'll back off that and say, if they put it on my desk, I'll sign it. I think I can't say whether he said that publicly. I don't have that on the record, but we anticipate that he will. But from a litigation standpoint, it's been defended, and I would recommend that for those of us who go out into other states, you know, Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, has actually a very nice way to handle this. We passed a law in 1993 signed by then Governor Doug Wilder, the best governor Virginia's ever had, in my mind, saying that the state of Virginia will not bargain with union officials over working conditions for government employees. It's a strict prohibition on the books in Virginia, and it's the right way to handle this policy. We don't stop anyone from joining a union. If you're a fireman, police officer, nurse, government employee, teacher, you can join any organization you want. And you can go to Richmond on Lobby Day and you can make your voice heard. But we are not, in Virginia, going to allow a private organization to get a position above taxpayers when it comes to redress of their government. That's the position we ought to take. Yeah. Yes, sir. Christopher?
My home state is Colorado, and which has become rather, I guess it's always been somewhat purple, you know, but how is Colorado looking in terms of right to work?
Yeah. Yeah, Christopher, that's a great question. We have been laboring in the fields in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado for years and years and years, and we went away, the National Right to Work Committee went away for a while. Let me tell you, we got to a point where we passed the bill, we passed a right to work law in the House by 15 votes. We had a Governor Bill Owens, who was the sponsor of the bill when he was a state senator, and we had one vote in the Colorado Senate that we needed to get the bill to Governor Owens' desk, and we didn't get the vote. We lost by one vote. The next year, we passed the bill in the House, or the next legislative cycle, which would have been maybe another election cycle beyond that. We passed the bill in the House by 9 votes, and again, we lost by 1 vote on second reading in the Colorado legislature, and we didn't get the bill to the governor's desk at that time. At that point, others in the state who got interested in right to work and got excited about it decided to put it on the ballot. They decided to make an initiative of right to work, and we encouraged them not to do that. We encouraged them to continue to do the grassroots mobilization, hold politicians accountable, and move the bill forward that way statutorily. They decided against our wisdom to put it on the ballot. They lost. Once you lose a referendum, it's very hard to come back to the state and to the legislature and say, oh, by the way, this just lost on the ballot. Would you please introduce this bill again? There are politicians that will do that for you and will fight hard, but generally that mushy middle will say, the people have spoken. And oftentimes in direct democracy, I think that's the title they use, and I'm not a proponent of direct democracy, because what I believe it does is it gives politicians the way to say, this thing may hurt me politically. I would like the people to decide this, and I won't have to take a stand on it, and therefore I will not be hurt by the fallout of whatever way this goes. The idea of putting something on the ballot, I know people get so frustrated that we can never get this legislature to pass this bill, and so we got to put it on the ballot. We got to give it to the people. We passed a right to work law in Michigan. Yeah.
Vote was on that in the referendum?
They got 45.7 or 46. 46. It was 54-46, I think, is what it ended up being. Yeah. Yep.
Let's have one more.
One more question. Got one back there.
I guess this is probably appropriate since today is National Signing Day for college athletes all over the country.
Oh.
Do you have any, opinion or anything else on the push to unionize college athletes, across
Yeah.
the country, and what, if anything, is Right to Work doing on that issue?
Great question. Yeah, there has been a move at Northwestern University, I believe it was, which is a private university. The National Labor Relations Board ruled that those employees could unionize and they could form a union as college athletes. The idea of college athletes joining an organization to advocate for them is something that we would support. Unfortunately, what happens under those organizing rules is that workers are going to, college football players are going to be forced to pay fees in order to play. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea, the idea that scholarship students in private universities who play football can unionize and withhold their services. We came out supportive of the idea that these college athletes should have a voice for themselves, but the idea of forcing them into union collective is something we opposed. I mean, absent a change in the private sector labor law, basically what the union wanted there was forcing all these workers into this collective, doing all this stuff for them. And right now it's in limbo at this point. I forget what the status of the case is, but the board has enjoined it or something's happening where there's litigation. What's that? They've not counted the votes. Right, that's right. The votes have been impounded. That's right. They have not counted the votes, so they don't know whether they won. I think that means that they may have lost the election. That's generally what the imposition of when they impound the votes, that's usually what happens. But, union officials are opportunists. They're looking for new revenue streams. They're a business, too. Organized labor in this country is about a $20 billion a year business. I mean, they've got overhead, they've got bills to pay, they've got things to do, so they're always looking for new revenue streams. In the private sector, they're down to, 6.6% of the private sector workers in unions. I mentioned 37% of government employees or so. So they're interesting. Let me just finish with one little quote because, and I'll do this, I apologize for taking the time. I brought this and meant to get to it. But it's interesting. We get encouraged by some of the things we do and some of the things we're able to accomplish as conservatives and advocates of freedom and individual rights. But every once in a while, we get a peek behind the curtain of what the left is saying, the progressives are saying about right to work. And there's been a debate after the Harris v. Quinn victory and Indiana and Michigan passing right to work laws and now the increased interest in right to work laws. There was a book written by a leftist that came out this is In These Times magazine. And it says, this is a book review, it talks about unionization and what they may have done wrong. And I quote here, it says, specifically, the author of the book realizes that practices like the agency shop and exclusive representation hobble labor's cause by making union membership coercive and providing material base for the leadership's disconnect from the rank and file. This is the left saying this. They go on to say, what makes labor such an alien thing among U.S. workers is that they can take a chunk of people's paychecks without their consent. And it's a major reason why anti-union forces have been so successful in Wisconsin, Michigan, and elsewhere. Labor's best argument against right to work is a political loser, both at the ballot box and in the courts. That's what they're saying about right to work. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, no wonder people came out when they got the word that you're going to be here. As a token of our appreciation, it's my pleasure to present to you another Adam Smith tie.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Thank you.